For this week, my take on the enigmatic John Pepper, who passed away at the age of 90. Remarkably, he was diagnosed with Parkinson's in 1992 and enigmatically continued to walk briskly, without assistance, for 33 years after his diagnosis. No freezing gait, no stumbling, no shuffling. In fact, his Parkinson's symptoms were barely perceptible at all. He's been a controversial figure in the Parkinson's community for years, frequently referred to as the man who walked off Parkinson's. Quack is a word that may come to mind when you hear such an audacious claim. About the only way you could raise more suspicion is if you wrote a book called Reverse Parkinson's. Yep, that's the title. So if the title of his book doesn't really help to close the credibility gap, there are some pearls of wisdom in John's story. And legitimate evidence is mounting through extensive peer-reviewed research that would seem to back some, if not most, of his claims. Now, way before I heard of John Pepper, if you'll permit me a brief tangent, soon after my PD diagnosis in 2018, I was watching a Jane Pauley interview of Michael J. Fox on TV, and he demonstrated how he could stop his tremor and his writhing movement, known as dyskinesia, for a brief time.
I can make myself still, but I won't be as animated.
Show me what happens if you make yourself still. But we're not talking.
And that got me to thinking, wow, this would be a great topic for the Rush Limbaugh show.
In this commercial, he is exaggerating the effects of the disease. He is moving all around and shaking, and it's purely an act. This is the only time I have ever seen Michael J. Fox portray any of the symptoms of the disease.
Give that guy a Presidential Medal of Honor. And who better to give that medal than the guy who publicly mocked a journalist with a disability at a MAGA rally?
This guy, I don't know what I said, I don't remember.
And if you're thinking, that's just Trump being Trump, we know his heart is in the right place. Consider this clip of his nephew.
Donald had never met William. He didn't understand the inspiration William is to people. I called him to say, Donald, the fund is running low. And without skipping a beat, he said, your son doesn't recognize you. Let him die and move down to Florida. Now, I can't explain how anybody could say that about another human being, least of all your grandnephew.
Clearly, President Trump's heart truly is in the right place. Like a deep freeze in carbonite. Regardless how you fall on the political spectrum, Parkinson's knows no political boundaries. It's equally shitty for all. So as I was watching Michael J. Fox, I thought if there were just some way to extend this tantalizing capability to be able to be still for more than a brief moment. But any Parky or their caregiver knows that tremor is just the tip of a very big iceberg. There's a whole smorgasbord of symptoms at all different levels of progression. And there is a lot of variation of the types of symptoms among people with Parkinson's. This was made shockingly apparent to me when I met and literally walked among thousands of Parkies for 2 days at the 2018 World Parkinson's Conference in Kyoto. Incidentally, the same conference center where the second major global climate accord was signed in 1997. The very big difference with the Parkinson's conference being that every single attendee there desperately wanted an actual solution to the problem at hand. Sadly, there were some very young people there with profoundly debilitating dystonia, causing them severe postural contortion. On a break between lectures, I saw a young man alone outside with dyskinesia so intense I literally thought for a second he was practicing Tai Chi. You see, 2018 was still very early in my PD journey, and I had just never seen these sorts of intense symptoms before. It was humbling to say the least. Over the course of the 2-day conference, it was made very clear to me that my twitchy toe and slight leg drag were absolutely zero cause for any self-pity. But at the same time, I couldn't help wondering which of these smorgasbord menu items were lurking in my future iceberg. It was humbling and terrifying at the same time, and yet also comforting to be among my newfound tribe. Finally, a club they can't kick me out of. Yet. A couple of years later, I discovered an article about John Pepper, and suddenly there was another rabbit hole of inquiry that had to be explored. I never met John, but he did briefly respond to an email I sent. He basically told me, throw my Parkinson's medication down the toilet. Now, to be fair, in his book, he does clearly state that he is not a doctor, and that this advice should be taken without first consulting your physician, which is definitely more disclosure than this guy gave.
And then I see the disinfectant, where it knocks it out in a minute, 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside or almost a cleaning?
You can kind of see how hot takes like throw your meds down the toilet might just rub the medical establishment the wrong way. Regardless of how controversial John Pepper may be, he's not without his supporters, many of whom don't seem to be controversial figures at all. Now, I have no connection to John or his family, but I do think Parkies will find his book interesting, relatable, and probably useful, whether you borrow it from the library or buy it. It's an interesting read, especially as a new and early onset Parkie, but it is at times a bit rambling and even conspiratorial, particularly his claim that Big Pharma is trying to hush him somehow. Not that Big Pharma doesn't have some enormous trust issues, like, say, 600% increases on life-saving allergy medicine, or the millions of people hooked on highly addictive and highly lucrative pain medications. But every indication is that John Pepper died peacefully at the age of 90, and so far no sightings of any one-armed men fleeing his premises.
He had a mechanical arm.
While some in the medical establishment have written him off as either not having had Parkinson's in the first place, or painting him as a quack trying to exploit Parkinson's patients to hawk his books, I think it's just too easy to write John Pepper off as a fraud or a faker. It just doesn't add up that a reasonably successful printing business owner suddenly decides to dedicate his retirement years to trying to defraud Parkinson's patients. No, my interpretation of John is that he, like so many of us, has a certain subset of Parkinson's symptoms that were unique to him, coupled with a demonstrated ingenuity for working around his PD symptoms creatively. Most importantly, John kept a consistent program every 2 days of exercise focused very heavily on the actual mechanics of walking. His concept of conscious control is akin to advances being made with prosthetics, which essentially requires the relearning of how to walk, or lift a spoon to your mouth, or drink from a glass with control over the tremor. There's no magical trances, no special elixir. It's just plain hard work with a dash of cleverness. Unfortunately, hard work still doesn't come in a pill form. Conscious control of your movement builds upon the brain's ability to heal itself through what scientists call neuroplasticity. Again, similar to the way amputees relearn to function with a prosthetic. It's essentially rewiring your brain around the injured area to parts of the brain that don't typically act automatically but can still compensate for lost functionality. It's a bit like if a Wookiee has performed brain surgery on you, and exercise is your only hope of getting some function back again. This, for me, is the core aspect of what makes John's technique perfectly valid. Taking conscious control over something that was automatic before your illness, but has now gone haywire. In a world dominated by electronic devices, who the hell thinks about walking anymore? We do. Applying John's method of conscious control, the mechanics of my walking have significantly improved, when I pay attention to it. It's interesting the way someone you've never met can occupy such a significant piece of real estate in your brain. John Pepper is one such individual for me. His words bounce around inside my head pretty much every time I go for a run, or hold my utensils, or brush my teeth, or get distracted while walking.
Squirrel!
This kind of grouchy old guy is always there somehow. A sort of lifeline for me when I'm feeling less than enthusiastic about exercise or walking. Not because of some encouraging words, but more because he lays out the breadcrumb trail of how to essentially trick your brain into doing what you need it to do. That's really exciting when you actually see the fruit of it working for you, Am I ready to throw away my Parkinson's meds? I don't think so. And for God's sakes, please don't flush any medications down the toilet ever. No joke, it's a major environmental menace. But to be perfectly honest, going completely off L-Dopa is incredibly tempting if you're someone who struggles with dyskinesia. That's because long-term use of levodopa eventually leads to dyskinesia for most Parkinson's patients. My particular dyskinesia symptom is apparently rather unusual amongst Parkies. Most Parkies experience spontaneous squirming episodes when they are at or near to peak dose of levodopa. But some Parkies are subjected to the effect between off and on medication cycles. You may be thinking, why not simply shorten the time between doses and eliminate these troughs? Well, that is what I'm trying for. But back to the symptom iceberg. Another typical joy of PD is slow and unpredictable digestion. So it's timing exactly when my levodopa is going to show up that determine exactly how my day is going to roll. And shorter duration between doses means more doses per day, which in turn means more dyskinesia, setting up a vicious cycle. So why even take meds at all? Maybe John Pepper is really onto something here. Well, the baseline is no picnic either, dominated by tremor, stiffness, shuffling steps, and brain fog. And when the med is working, it's still pretty darn good. If my timing is good, I can string together 8 or 9 hours of feeling a lot like my old pre-Parkinson self. And this is where I level my strongest criticism at reverse Parkinson's. There's a not so subtle message that John Pepper was able to so successfully manage his symptoms through diet and exercise that he was able to go completely off his medication. But given the extremes of symptom variation, I think it's borderline irresponsible to put that message out there without the giant disclaimer that your results may vary. But I do encourage you to try some of John's conscious control techniques and check out his videos on YouTube. Even if you're not all in on his whole program, I think there's some valuable takeaways for Parkies and their carers. Reversing the severity of some of the symptoms of Parkinson's through sheer will and wiles is clearly not snake oil at all. As with most things in life, take the things that work for you and put them into your bag of tricks. It's probably smart to be skeptical of most of what's out there. PD will try to make your world smaller every day. It's good to occasionally find stuff like this that invites you to push back.